Hello there and welcome to TEDx University of Johannesburg 2021. My name is Musa Kaiser and I will be your program director today. So, what is TEDx? TEDx is a grassroots initiative created in the spirit of TED's overall mission to research and discover ideas worth spreading. TEDx brings the spirit of TED to local communities around the globe through TEDx events. Today's objective through this TEDx event is to provide the platform for the propagation of great ideas, storytelling, creativity, and innovation that inspires our communities to take part in the conversation and be part of the solutions to make a positive change in our world. The theme this year is Gaining the Edge. We have remarkable speakers from all walks of life, and they will be unloading what gaining the edge means to them. What does gaining the edge really mean? To me, that statement requires me to answer questions about what really lights my fire, what keeps me up at night, what my life's purpose is, and most importantly, what I want the global stage to know. I would love to introduce our first speaker, Ryan Stramroot. Ryan is an ultra-extreme open water and ice swimming adventurer. He has taken on swimming challenges in some of the world's most inhospitable waters and survived temperatures that have pushed boundaries of mankind and the mind. Ryan is also a businessman, a father, and in his very own words, is a quintessential average Joe. Ryan, take the virtual stage away.
Good day, everybody. I'd like to start my talk today by simply throwing out three statements. Statements that you've all heard a million times before in various guises, and I'm sure has formed part of your own narrative. Here's the first one. If you put your mind to it, anything is possible. If you can think it, you can achieve it. A strong mind makes the impossible possible. No one ever gives me pushback when I say that. In fact, over hundreds of keynotes I've delivered around the world to every level of audience, no one has ever queried it when I say, the human mind is the gateway to absolute greatness, because it really is. But where I do get a little bit of pushback and raised eyebrows is when I make the following statement. The human mind, this gateway to absolute greatness, is actually our biggest limitation. And that is what I want to explore with you today. Because as powerful as our minds are at helping us achieve our best, they are equally powerful in making us believe we have achieved our best. So let's go on a brief journey, and I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, you know what, I achieve at my best, I'm getting by, I take my family away on a holiday, I have a big house, I hit my target, I achieve my goals, and of course you do, because you believe and trust in your own mind to navigate you there. But I hope to show today through my talk, perhaps in a non-scientific way, how I've come to a certain awareness, which I want to share with you. An awareness of how our minds are actually defaulted to holding us back, not to propelling us forward. In fact, the very strength of our minds and the power of our minds is exactly the reason so many of us will underachieve our entire lives. And who are we to argue with what we have been convinced is so by our minds? Strange thing to say, perhaps. But it gets stranger. We are the we in that sentence. And when we have been convinced, essentially by ourselves, we have no reason to query it. We have no reason to believe we might not be achieving at our best. And I want to share with you how I came to that understanding. I want to introduce you to the element of cold and its unbelievable power. Now, I'm what you call an ultra-extreme open water and ice swimming adventurer. And it's through a fascinating story that took me initially from my couch, where I was becoming a very talented couch potato. The ripe age of 30, I decided to change my lifestyle and simply start a little swimming squad, probably just to tweak the lifestyle a bit and to justify the next beer. And it was this first step of joining a swimming squad that started a fascinating journey for me. Not just a physical journey to some of the planet's most inhospitable and remote places, but a mental journey from repeat exposures to eventually deadly cold water, and managing to extend my time in these circumstances, in hostile environments, for much longer than most believed was humanly possible. And slowly, through this, starting to formulate an understanding of how our minds really work. Now, in my game of extreme cold swimming, the accepted attire is simply a costume, goggles, and a cap. There's no wetsuit, there's no grease, there's no flotation aids at all. It's a very pure sport. And it didn't take me long to conclude the following by repeat immersions in the very cold water in and around Cape Town, South Africa, my hood, where the water is around 14 to 15 degrees Celsius, which is around 54 Fahrenheit. Concluded the following, that humans have not evolved well at all to handle the cold. However, we have evolved extremely well to avoid it. So when we throw ourselves into increasingly cold conditions, our body, but more importantly our mind, starts to implement a barrage of defense mechanisms to convince us to get out. I started to notice that no matter how routine the swim that I was doing or the challenge I'd undertaken was, how familiar it was to me, how many times I'd done it before, as the cold started to creep into my core, my mind started to react in a very specific way. Even intuitively, I knew without a doubt I can make the challenge I'd undertaken. I found myself in a position where I could not have positive thoughts. I could not have thoughts of I must persevere, I must push harder, reasons why I should continue, why I should complete the goal, except it was always the other way around. Reasons why I should get out, reasons why I can get into that support boat, back to warmth, back to safety. I bet many of you watching this today are wondering, does he ever see sharks in those dangerous waters in South Africa? Well, let me tell you, a cold water swimmer sometimes prays for a shark. Because if the support crew alongside see that fin coming, they will pull me out the water really quickly into the safety boat alongside where I can wrap a nice warm blanket and have a hot chocolate. And it wouldn't have been me who failed. There was a shark. A safety net was starting to form. And the more I did this, the more I let the cold start to creep into my core, the more I started to experience consciously what all of us experience subconsciously on a daily basis, a very accentuated defensive reaction of my mind to the environment I was in. And slowly it started to dawn on me that all this negative energy that I was experiencing, all these negative thoughts, had nothing at all to do with my ability, had nothing at all to do with my training, nothing to do with my dedication to achieve the goal. It was merely these defense mechanisms that were highly evolved to make sure that I get out of what it perceives as a hostile environment. My swimming journey then took me to take on perhaps the Everest of all cold water marathon swims, the English Channel. 34 kilometers across with many, many hurdles on the way and cold water. It was way before my time, and I had been swimming in the English Channel for 9 hours. The weather had turned absolutely terrible, and it had whipped the water up, and there were waves crashing over me, and it had started to get dark. I was freezing cold, and 9 hours into that swim, I hit the wall. I hope you all understand the concept of hitting the wall. When you hit the wall and you're in any endurance event, it usually signifies the end for you. The tank is empty and you cannot go on. Now, when you hit the wall and you're 9 hours into an English Channel swim, the water is rough, it is getting dark and you're freezing cold. If you even put one hand on the support boat alongside or get any help, your swim is over. Hitting the wall is absolutely devastating. And here I was, it was absolutely impossible for me to take one more stroke. Had I pulled out of the English Channel on that day, I'd have been disappointed, obviously. But I wouldn't beat myself up too much. Why would I? I had trained for 2 years to get to that English Channel. I had prepared and studied weather charts for ages to pick the perfect day. I'd put the crew in place and I'd swum for 9 hours and the weather had turned terrible. I would have climbed out onto the support boat and everybody would have patted me on the back and said, "Well done, Ryan, that was incredible. 9 hours in those conditions." And I would have been like an excuse magnet and sucked it all in and nodded my head and said, "Yes, I did my best." And that is exactly what the default setting of our minds is designed to do. It's designed to make you believe in your own limitations. Because when we believe in those limitations, we have no reason to challenge them. Now, I did not pull out of the English Channel that day, and slowly a picture was starting to formulate. Largely thanks to a very strong support team, I swam for another 4 hours and eventually walked out onto a deserted, icy cold, pitch dark French beach 12 hours and 54 minutes later. And I started to unpack what had gone on for me out there in the English Channel. I had reached a point where it was impossible for me to carry on, yet somehow I had shifted, I had changed gear, I had flicked a switch, or however you want to look at it, and I'd swum for another 4 hours in terrible conditions and achieved my goal. I was starting to get a first-hand look at just what can be achieved if you are able to push past the initial point where your mind tells you it is time to get out. And I was starting to become aware. Now let's skip a few years forward, and I want to take you with me to a place called Tumin, Siberia. And I still ask myself to this very day how I got myself into this mess. But I had committed to take on a challenge to swim a 1 kilometer distance, that's 1,000 meters, in this little place called Tumin at an ice swimming event. And without doing much more homework before I arrived, the buses dropped me off at the swimming venue where the pools were cut from a frozen lake, and I walked smack into the teeth of minus 33 degrees Celsius. That's minus 27 Fahrenheit. And as the bite of that cold hit my skin, my mind immediately took me to that place of impossible. No way on God's green earth am I stripping out of these 5 layers of clothing in minus 33 degrees Celsius into a costume and then jumping into frozen water still covered by ice to try and swim 40 laps of this swimming pool to get my 1 kilometer distance. It is just impossible. Death is the only outcome. Yet 24 hours later, after an intense mental process and lots of self-counseling, I found myself standing barefoot, feet sticking to the dry Siberian ice, diving into the frigid water, breathing minus 33 degrees deep into my lungs. And instantly and very consciously, I felt my mind implement a barrage of defense mechanisms. It implemented pain, panic, fear, hyperventilation. They all came together in a split second to accentuate self-doubt. I was denied the ability of rational thought. All I could think of was how to get out. But now I was aware. And I survived my 1 kilometer in Siberia, and I achieved the goal. And ladies and gentlemen, I am no different to any of you. I'm complete average Joe. Our minds are indeed the most amazing, versatile, unexplored power tools that we have as a human race. But as a human race, for our safety and for our survival, it has to use a percentage of that power to make us believe in our own limitations, to make us believe we are giving our best. And that is in order to keep us safe. Now let's forget about the cold for a while. That's my pain. I want to talk about our daily lives, our everyday lives, where we face a barrage of difficult decisions and hostile environments, be it in business, in sport, in family, in social, in personal, where exactly the same processes are at play, turning us away, making us believe that we have already achieved our best and not having any inkling that we could do better. And the reason for this, it finally dawned on me, is that not only have we evolved to keep safe from physical harm, we have evolved to keep safe from the emotional pain that comes from failure. Because when we fail, there's a little bit of hurt, and there are consequences, and there might be humiliation, and naturally, the powerhouse of our minds does not allow that to happen. And sadly, in our daily realities, that means missed opportunities. Yes, we might fail. There will be consequences. There might even be humiliation, but there are always learnings. And where there are learnings, there's growth. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to end my talk just introducing you to 2 lines, very simply. Firstly, the line where your mind tells you the end point is where we naturally do a U-turn back to comfort without even knowing it. Way further down the line is another line which perhaps we should never cross, that I call the real impossible. And it's only when we are aware can we figure out how to step over that first line that the mind sets for you and immerse yourself between the two where the magic happens. It is my hope, ladies and gentlemen, that if you don't yet completely believe me, because maybe your powerhouse mind is not allowing you to, that maybe, just maybe, you are now aware that you are being governed by an overzealously protective mind that is steering you back to comfort rather than propelling you forward to embrace opportunity. Test it out for yourselves. Identify your own safety boat and how readily you jump into it. Perhaps you can gain the edge by staying in the water just a little bit longer.
Thank you, Ryan. That was a great way to start our day one TEDx University of Johannesburg. Very inspirational. Our next speaker needs no introduction at all, Tobile Chittenden. She's well known for her groundbreaking community work. Tobile is a community builder and purpose pioneer with a passion and interest in social and creative entrepreneurship, as well as non-profit organizations. Tobile, over to you.
The reason why I exist as the human being I am today is truly because of the people that have surrounded me throughout my life. Like links to a chain, there have been integral people who have entered my life, who through linking their lives to mine, created possibility and hope. They closed the gaps that were present, and they strengthened weak areas and have linked me to a better future. The future I am living today, that future has led me to sharing my story with you. My story really begins with the first family that linked their lives to mine. It must have been around the end of 1989 or early 1990, when I was just 8 months old, that I could say the first link to the chain of my progression was first formed. My father and mother, both Zulu, were forced to flee their rural home, where the frightening political violence in Natal had erupted due to the African-on-African conflict between the ANC and the IFP, which was instigated by the apartheid government at the time. And with nothing but the clothes on their backs and an 8-month-old me, my parents managed to escape the devastation and ended up at the doorstep of a white family, the Richards family, who lived in the suburbs of Lelusha. They did not only open their doors to us, but they changed the trajectory of mine and later my little sister's lives for years to come. They didn't simply just give my family a few coins in the hopes of closing the door to continue with their suburban lifestyle once more. No, instead, they opened their doors knowing that what had happened to me and my family was ultimately connected and impacted theirs. They understood the concept of Ubuntu, that we're all part of a chain, and that their existence was linked to mine and vice versa. And so instead of seeing this as a disturbance, they saw this as an opportunity to use their privilege as a tool towards realizing justice and bringing about equality to this country. And they also knew, or perhaps they came to learn, that this wasn't an overnight thing. There was no quick fix to solve the brokenness, the pain, the trauma and division that not only our family had faced, but in fact, the entire nation too. And they were perhaps overwhelmed, but not paralyzed by the enormity of the problems that us and our country faced. And instead, they decided to do what they could with what they had, where they were. And they decided to play the long game. They knew that change was a long road journey, and they also knew that they couldn't really make a difference from a distance or behind high walls. No, they knew they would have to get involved, that they would get knee-deep in the mess and chaos, and that they would make mistakes, and that it wouldn't be smooth sailing. But they knew that progress for our country outweighed the inconvenience. They knew that change needed to happen with and not to. That change wasn't a them thing, but that it needed to happen together. And this family not only gave my family a place to stay, but they linked arms. They helped my mom raise my sister and I. And after my father, who was consumed by the unresolved anger he faced, ended up being arrested, they invited us into their family. And 32 years later, our Mkunu, Richards, and now Chittenden family remain united, continuing to walk side by side. And since then, many more people have come into my life, adding more links to this progression of my life. And in the workplace, for example, where my bosses invested in me from doing normal corporate stuff like affording various learning opportunities and training to personal development, like helping me get my glasses or my driver's license. But most importantly, taking a chance on me when I wasn't the most qualified for the job. And all of these are small but significant instances in my life where people took the time and took the risk to guarantee my development. Not because they owed it to me, but because they thought about the potential of what might be. They thought about what can become. And it's these people and their approaches that have shaped my today. Their long-term commitment to my success has shaped my heart and my commitment to do the same for others. And I share this story to highlight my point for this talk, that gaining the edge must be done together. Because there really is no edge without inclusion. There is no edge without equality. There is no edge without access. And it's because what I have seen in my own life that I have invested in people the same way. And it's this lens that is formed for change making that has proved to me that this concept of slow and inclusive growth should be emphasized in all spheres of society. And I now spend most of my time thinking about this in my work for a social enterprise where we help drive purpose-driven business, but also in my work as a community builder, where I and many others in the neighborhood called Makers Valley are building a well-being economy. It's a local economy where people and planet are as important as profit. But how do we enable a community to advance, uplift, and develop without the ugly side of gentrification rearing its head? So that the very people who seek upliftment and change do not become victims of their own advancement and end up being displaced. It's a question we keep at the forefront of our minds because you see, with anything that seeks to improve and bring positive impact, there can also be a consequent negative result. And so it's a question that we must keep asking ourselves when we partner with stakeholders, when we develop new programs or projects, or when we're seeking funding. And we have come to find that the answers often lie with our community itself. We can minimize the negative repercussions when we ensure that all voices in the community are heard and that they have equal power. And it's when we ensure that the commercially minded investors see the commercial value of community building and long-term investment. It's when we ensure transparent and inclusive community engagement are part of the policies and development strategies. It's when we see public-private partnerships, all parties working hand in hand, that we see win-win-win outcomes. And so with that being said, I would like to pose the question, how do we gain the edge without the edge harming others? When we engage in the topic of advancing as a society through technology, we need to ensure that no one is left behind. We need to ensure that the direction we're going in has been co-created and not just chosen by a few. We need to make sure that we look at the far-off impacts and not just the short-term gains. Leaving no one behind makes sure that there is an inclusive approach on the way forward. It means slowing down to ensure that there is equality in the design of the technology and apps of tomorrow. And we cannot pretend that technology will solve all our problems when the people who are facing the problems are not included in its evolution. Inequality, for example, has often been showcased on the front of magazines or newspapers with juxtaposed images of visible wealth and poverty. And we see this with housing, education, employment, gender, and now more than ever, we are feeling the impact of a digital divide. The digital divide is not as simple as having access or not having access to the internet or the equipment that is required to do that. Gaining the edge together means looking at all aspects of access, looking at language, education levels, levels of income. It means looking at location and levels of bandwidth and many other factors. And so when we speak about ensuring access for all so that all can progress, it's vital that we bring all to the table. How do we do that though? How do we open up the chain links to allow for more to enter? Well, as the example of the Richards family in my life, this is not a quick fix or a one-stop workshop solution. We shouldn't assume that the gap will be bridged if we don't think about every aspect of our world, the way we use technology on a daily basis, without thinking about those living in our midst who do not have the same opportunity. The same opportunity perhaps to watch this as you are right now. And this intentional outlook, our outward focused thinking, should be the new way of being, a new way of approaching development as we seek to rebuild our country and our world. Embracing our interconnectedness, ensuring that our digital connection enhances our human connection. That's what strengthens our society. And gaining the edge cannot be achieved in silos, where being first to market is idolized. We have all too often seen the flaws of tech when the ramifications of apps and systems that may have well been initially created with good intention have become dangerous or not well thought through, and their obsession with profit margins have overtaken their initial purpose. We have to be intentional about leaving no one behind. And in the last year, I have seen on a day-to-day basis the desolation and the loss of those who are. When the world was pivoting to online and digital platforms, my community was stuck in a world that could not continue with business. They did not have access to market. They could not do school on Zoom. And so the inequality gap continued to widen as the lack of access to technology resulted in a further lack of access to employment, income, and education. And however, while the world tried to continue with their new normal, we knew that we had come face to face with the realities of poverty that our community had endured. And food insecurity became a critical issue to be addressed. That through what is being called a network of possibility, a range of diverse stakeholders, community members, business owners have come together to provide food to those in need. And instead of a top-down or bottom-up approach, this hardship faced by all united all parties and leveled the power dynamics that created an opportunity that allowed for everyone's input and ideas to be equally valued. And it was through this beautiful collaboration that most solutions were birthed. One of them I'd like to share with you today being the Community Recycling Swap Shop. A young, dynamic, creative waste management business linked up with us, the community-based organization, to create a partnership that would be beneficial to all parties involved. They needed more recyclable items for their business model to work, and at the same time, we were brainstorming ways to create a more dignified and fair system for those in need to access the limited food donated to us by NGOs. And what resulted was a model that encourages the community to recycle, and for every bag of recyclables dropped off at the depot, they are rewarded with 1 point, or what we now call MVPs, a co-created point system or a community currency that in exchange can be used to redeem or access donated surplus food and hygiene products. And this has created shared value for all entities involved, and it's created a more dignified experience that allows active participation and a collective and shared responsibility for our community. And this model has been amazingly successful, but it was not an overnight success. It required time and investment into education. It took many meetings and workshops to iron out many of the initial flaws. It was through many iterations, kicking off with a simple Google Sheets system and 2 tablets, and has now progressed slowly using the many insights of our community members. And in the first few months, we saw the issues were such as lack of access to internet, low digital literacy levels, and entry-level smartphones that had so little space for storage for apps. And these vital learnings has led us to the system we use now, a low-tech platform that has worked due to the fact that it meets our community where it's at. And it's through this approach that we have learned that solutions will only work when the people who are affected by the problems we aim to solve are at the heart of the design. What this community swap shop has taught me is to embrace the slow, to take time and investing into the process of building with one another, because it's not only about the outcome or the end product, but it's about how we got there. And the links that have been built, that have been bonding and strengthening our community along the way. It's through an all-in approach that we can start to see a community, a city, and even a country truly progress. And we can all take on this approach wherever we are, in whatever position we have, and in every meeting we engage in, we have the chance to ensure that our tomorrow is inclusive, to shape a tomorrow that is for all. And all it takes is asking the question, how can we gain the edge together?
That was such a heartwarming story, Tobile. It really captured the essence of gaining the edge personally to share it with the rest of the world. Thank you. Our next speaker is Prof. Anthony Brown. He is an Associate Professor of Inclusive Education, Life Orientation, and Educational Psychology at the University of Johannesburg. Prof reflects on how, as a black gay professor, he used clothing to transgress the normative professor image to produce counter-narratives that promote a paradigm shift in ways his students engage with queer communities. Prof, over to you.
As a young academic, many moons ago, my first lecture was with a relatively large class of 30 students. As I was setting up the computer to project my PowerPoint slides, and I noticed that students was not settling down while a few were still roaming outside. I nevertheless projected the first slide and introduced myself. A gradual silence came over the class with a few giggles. One of the students put up his hand to alert me that they were waiting for Dr. Anthony Brown, almost indicating it can't be me, or I must be in the wrong venue. To their surprise, I responded, that is correct. The students again put up his hand to ask if I am Dr. Anthony Brown, and I responded with a question, why? By now, my question led to more giggles. The student mumbled, impossible. This is where I realized there is some perception about who Dr. Anthony Brown may be. I started to ask who they thought is Dr. Anthony Brown. One said, I thought he is a British man with round glasses and a squeaky voice, while another said, she expected an older man. And then I asked who they thought I was. Another student at the back responded, I thought you the IT guy. Amazed, I wanted to know why. Again, the response came, you are too young to be a doctor. Another student said, but you are black with a white name. While another said, but you have dreadlocks. I wanted to know, what about the dreadlocks? With more interesting responses, lecturers don't smoke ganja, a local reference for cannabis. This was quite an awakening moment that there is a particular image of a lecturer, and I certainly transgress with my presentation. My black body, young body, uncommon doctor title and name, on the day carried a certain knowledge more so. My body started to teach before I could start with my first lesson. My body disrupted the norm of the hegemonic professor identity. It interfered with the learning space I learned that the classroom is more than the four walls and the projected notes, that my body itself is part of the classroom. In fact, my body could be the classroom. Years later, I took up a new position at another institution. My first class was during a cold winter's morning. I decided to put on a shawl similarly to the one that I have on today. Ironically, the topic for the lesson focused on identity, self, and society. One of the brave students in the class raised his hand to ask, "What do you call the wrapping over your shoulders, sir?" I responded, "It's a shawl." And his next question was, "Isn't it something worn by women?" It opened a whole new discussion of male and female designated clothing, which further developed in a discussion of masculinity and femininity. I then asked if the shawl takes away my masculinity, of which one of the male students responded, "He will never wear a shawl. It is just too gay." Wow! Instantly, we navigated into a new discussion of sexuality. Who is gay? What makes you gay? How do you identify as a gay person, etc.? And boom, the next question was, "Sir, are you gay?" The body yet again had the opportunity to become its own classroom. I wanted to know why the question, and the answer was, "Your shawl." I decided to prompt a little bit more on the topic and asked if it would matter if I am gay. One student said, "I have never seen a gay professor. It was an impression that heterosexuality is the only acceptable, esteemed, privileged, and valorized identity. At the same time, those who deviate from this norm are doomed, justified to be looked down, and in some cases be fatally removed from the surface of this universe." A debate among students erupted about gayness as an un-African identity, an abomination, and something abnormal. It was emotional, tensed, at times verbally aggressive, with some defending and others denouncing it. At this point, I introduced the South African Constitution, which acknowledges, affirms, protects sexual and gender diversity, the South African School Act that prohibits discrimination, and the Educator's Code of Conduct that calls for an inclusive and respectful learning environment. It confronted these aspiring teachers about their future professional identity, but also their social responsibility to a diverse nation. One of the female students wanted to know if I was really gay. My response, "I don't know what really gay means, but yes, I am gay." One of the females at the back of the class shouted, "Oh, what a waste." And another said, "But he looks like a real man." This reminded me of my very first lecture in higher education, with my dreadlocks and skinny jeans and an image that disrupted the identity of what a professor should and should not look like. I consciously realized that my body and its presentation has the power to teach, to disrupt, to question, and to transform. The classroom teaching tools go beyond the computer, beyond the lecture slides, the voice, and the chalkboard. It certainly includes the body of the lecturer, the body of other students, bodies in our textbooks. As the debate continued to who is gay in the African classroom, a cisgender appearing student raised her hand and said, "Your description of a lesbian person does not fit me. I look like your everyday female, but I'm not. I'm a lesbian in a loving relationship with another woman." One male student in class shouted, "Unbelievable," while another invited her to be his girlfriend so that he could fix her. This pedagogical moment made me ask how bodies could position, challenge, and change the status quo. The body confronted and generated a dialogue which stimulated reflections about deep-seated, normative, and often hostile perceptions of being, personhood, identity, self, and the collective. The body as a pedagogical tool in the form of a black gay professor with a shawl, a young lecturer with dreadlocks and a perceived European name, a cisgender appearing lesbian student not only disrupted the status quo, but liberated and reshaped pervasive perceptions of being and difference. The expression of the body and its pedagogical power challenged students to examine and rethink their power from unearned privileges of hegemony, normativity, and mainstream views. In a lesson about the self in society, the body as a teaching space calls on an awareness for diverse ways of being, and it may not be comfortable or palatable, but the acknowledgement of the existence and belonging is fundamental. The body as a pedagogical tool in and outside the classroom charge all of us to become more learned about our rainbow diversity, to heal and to become more human and more real. The body as a pedagogical tool should be unapologetic and intentional in creating diverse ways of being, and in so doing, generate uncomfortable conversations that would deconstruct compulsory embodiments that dominate, oppress, and discriminate. These conversations not only are uncomfortable, but relevant in the classroom discussions. It demonstrates how students can listen and hear each other, value the diversity of expressions, and encourage excitement in the learning process for the real world. The body as the pedagogical tool does not only offer knowledge to formal institutions of learning, but the body in its presentation become moments of transformation around the dinner table, the barbecue fire, recreational parks, malls and supermarkets, where difference is often insulted, ridiculed, and reduced. These are the spaces where currencies are handed over to dehumanize and to demoralize certain bodies that do not conform. Allow and be proud of the body of difference. When we overtly celebrate different bodies inside our home environments, our classrooms, our religious spaces, cultural settings, we prepare a celebration of life in an inclusive, united, respectful, and socially just community. Thank you so much.
That was very inspirational, stimulating, and thought-provoking. Prof, thank you for that. Up next, we have some entertainment. You might remember this voice from Freshly Ground, performing Remember Who You Are, Zolani Mahola.
If the birds up in the trees know how beautiful they are, if the mountains and the sea know how magical they are, if the stars which made our skin show how radiant they are, won't they shine their light until you remember who you are? Make a love You're the dreamer awaking. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You're a part of everything. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. We will shine these words until you remember who you are. Who you are. Remember who you are. Who you are. Remember who you are. Give her a crowd and watch them sing. Make a lot and make a king. Give him a crown and watch them sing. Make him queen and bring him peace. We are more than these bodies. We are more than these stories. Inside everyone, a seed to grow. You know, you need to say it. Cry yourself to sleep. Oh, remember who you are. You who thought you were broken. Oh, remember who you are. You who thought yourself ugly. Child, remember who you are. You who tried to bury you. Who remember who you are. Who you are. Remember who you are. Who you are. Remember who you are. Give them a crown and watch them sing. Make them lords and make them king. Give them a crown and watch them sing. Make them queen and bring them peace. But we are more than these bodies. We are more than these stories. Inside everyone, a seed to grow. You know, you need to say 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 I remember who I am.
I hope you're enjoying our life-changing, thought-provoking TEDx University of Johannesburg event as much as we are. Our final speaker for today's TEDx University of Johannesburg event is Dali Tembo. He is a leading strategist and futurist focusing on youth trends. The future is now. Ladies and gentlemen, Dali, over to you.
Ever since I can remember, I've been building bridges, not the kind that connects highways or traverses rivers, the kind that creates an understanding between increasingly divergent thoughts, between everyday people on the street and on the ground, and the decision makers who are in boardrooms. You know, my old boss used to say, decisions born in boardrooms die on the streets. This has never been more true than it is today, except today those decisions are reincarnated, turned into memes, and immortalized on the internet. Increasingly, there are a dwindling number of participants in the game who wants to be an African business decision maker. And it's not surprising. There's a number of reasons why. If you look around at what's happening on our continent, we have pandemics, dwindling economics, we've got wars that are happening in different countries, corruption, systematic challenges that are hindering basic service delivery. We also have just a plethora of social crises, creating an overwhelming sense of fluidity in the attitudes, needs, and behaviors of people on the continent. So it's, in essence, what we're really seeing is we're under pressure as a society to do way more than merely adapt in this environment. We're being forced to shape it. One of my favorite computer scientists, Alan Kay, actually said it best. He said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So this pressure to imagine and then construct a future has emerged not just out the blue. It's something we've been seeing developing over the last couple of decades with some remarkable examples of why we need to pay attention. Think of Apple's insistence on research during Y2K, 9/11. You know, they lost 33% of their total revenue as a result of the Depression. And even then, they still spent an emphasis on research and making sure that they could understand what people's ideas and needs and values were. The same is happening locally. Think of PEP's incessant need to continuously invest in research on its core lower income customers, despite being the hardest hit on the continent over the last 2 years, the results of which we have amazing examples of new and innovative new product extensions. Think PEP Home, think new PEP stores, think PEP Cellular. That's what gaining and keeping an advantage is all about today. Keeping abreast of something we like to refer as cultural intelligence. An outsider's seemingly natural ability to interpret someone's unfamiliar and ambiguous gestures the way that person's friends or family or like a peer group would be able to through research. Cultural intelligence actually allows us to dream by taking advantage of 3 amazing disciplines. One of them, which I refer to a lot, is anthropology, essentially looking into the past to study, what makes humans tick. Consumer research, which all of us here should be able to understand, which looks at the present, takes a snapshot of human behavior and tries to explain it. And then trend forecasting, which we're hearing more and more about, using foresight tools to look into the future. All of these 3 disciplines are very important, especially now. And people keep asking the same question. They say, why is it that it's become so important? Despite the tools we have access to today, and think social media, think Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, think big data, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, Google Analytics, think our HR departments with psychometric tests and the plethora of data and information that's out there. Despite all of these resources, our ability to empathize with other people doesn't seem to be expanding, and research seems to back that up. The more research you uncover, the more evidence you're finding that it's actually the opposite direction, where we're struggling and we're more polarized than we've ever been before. Nowhere is this more relevant than in the myths that continue to cloud perceptions of the African continent and its customers. Indeed, much of the research that attempts to understand our customers is either based on quantitative big data research, or it's developed with an arm's length away from our customers. Indeed, one of my favorite quotes of all time is from Saatchi & Saatchi's Kevin Roberts, who once said, if you want to understand how a lion hunts, don't go to the zoo, go to the jungle. And that is essentially the key problem. We're looking through the microscope the wrong way around. And you can really see this in the way that you hear marketing departments speak about customers and describe interactions. Often I'll hear terms like guerrilla tactics, targets and segments, ambush marketing, positioning, barriers to entry. And I always laugh because it always struck me that this feels more like the description of an invasion than it does the foundations of a mutual interaction between 2 people with mutual respect. The need for a sense of discovery and adventure that remedies this perspective is what has informed my research and the co-founding of our business over the last 21 years. It's what's led to us debunking African myths like African youth tend to be less religious than their parents. In Algeria, for example, parents have actually been French. They smoked cigarettes and have laissez-faire attitudes. Young people will say, we don't. We're much more conservative. Other myths like being a rebel is about standing out. For example, if you get someone who's a Gen Z from South Africa, they'll say, I want to be an individual. just like all my friends. Trends move from the haves to the have-nots. In places like Nigeria, for example, the most important button when we do research into applications is not the download button, it's the upload button. Consumers are creating and not just consuming. As Africans, it's becoming abundantly clear that we're on our way to killing our inferiority complex. The path to competing globally or having the edge lies not with the collection of data points in research on customers, but actually on the ability for us to empathize with them on a human level. If we encourage those around us to see this, they'll realize that besides the broken narrative that often surrounds the continent, there is an Africa that offers the world a multitude of opportunities born from a vivid understanding of customers. And that's what's going to help us imagine a different world, and therefore better products and better services. The irony is, we've embraced all these negative myths about our continent, while simultaneously keeping the best about us a secret. Well, today I'm actually here to snitch. As Abraham Lincoln once said famously, it's not me who can't keep a secret, it's the people I tell those secrets to. To win today, we need to harness the imaginations of the people on the continent through empathetic research that doesn't merely try to just measure and describe opinions, but rather capture the essence and cultural impact of what that means. If we do this, we will learn that there are many things that are existing about our continent today that we can build this imagination off of. And the first thing is our youth. We have one of the most resilient customer bases in the world. Think about our young people. Many youth 15 to 24 express the burdens of unemployment. In South Africa, more than 55% at the time, and exposing significant gaps in education that we see all over the continent, especially when it comes to those entrants who are eventually able to even go into tertiary education. Despite this, I have found that when I investigate African markets and I have conversations one-on-one with youth, and I ask, how many young people feel confident about their futures? Overwhelmingly, the majority reply optimistically, expecting their standard of living to improve. So whilst we shouldn't romanticize survival tactics, this type of resilience is a hallmark of us as Africans. People who wouldn't want this as a characteristic of their customer base just don't make sense. 2, we are insanely innovative. The chaos and randomness of everyday life on the continent isn't a barrier towards innovation. Increasingly, it's actually proving to be the catalyst. Most of the most innovative cultural trends coming from our underprivileged communities are the ones that are having the big global impact. Think Amapiano, think streaming services, think about the ways people are using WhatsApp to start businesses. If you don't believe that this is creativity and innovation, just visit Yabacon. That's Lagos's version of Silicon Valley. If that doesn't work for you, go ahead and visit some of the 600 plus tech hubs that are all scattered across the continent. Innovation is very important. We have also a third secret weapon, which we've been hearing a lot about in recent times. And that is that one of the most exciting developments that we've observed, especially in recent years, has been a shift in this conversation about the importance of women contributing to Africa's future successes. Gender equality isn't just a social or labor market issue. It takes a rare and uniquely uninformed mind to believe that 50% of our continent's potential working population shouldn't be contributing to the economy. That's a bad idea. It's no secret that we've had quite a few things that have curtailed the progress of women on the continent. Everything from social, political, economic, and cultural constraints, especially in those lowest of low-income countries, and as a result of colonialism's emphasis on things like cash crops, perceptions around religion, gender discrimination in the workplace, that type of thing. However, this generation has seen an abundance of African firsts, the first female president, the first Nobel Peace Prize winner, the first Forbes wealthiest woman, and a host of other globally renowned leading female-first African scientists, artists, and entrepreneurs. This should give us hope that we're going in the right direction. And to conclude, and just to leave you with a message to take home, not all progress is the result of advanced technologies or discoveries. All action is preceded by some type of thought. Many of today's innovations are the result of progress in the imagination. These have sparked the kind of thinking that's made the impossible possible. For this to happen, however, our imagination muscles as decision makers need to be exercised. Who better to take these muscles to the gym than the young people you're building products and services for? It's really important, therefore, that our edge as Africans on the global platform will only be realized when we can exploit our natural abilities and imagine our own futures.
Thank you, Dali. That was very insightful and discerning. You had us on the edge of our seats. I love your work. That brings us to the end of our day, concluding day 1 of TEDx University of Johannesburg. We'll be back again tomorrow for day 2 with more inspiring, dynamic, vigorous, and fascinating speakers to talk us through our theme, Gaining the Edge. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Musa Kaiser, and I'll see you tomorrow.